A millionaire wakes up without memory in a hospital and discovers a nurse who cares for him with devotion. While investigating his past, he finds an unexpected connection to the village she came from. Gradual revelations show that his humanitarian actions may have had serious consequences. Now he faces a moral dilemma, trying to rebuild his life and find out who tried to destroy him. The constant beep of the heart monitor was the first sound that pierced his consciousness. It was like a sonic beacon guiding him back to reality. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the brightness of the hospital room. The white walls, the smell of antiseptic, everything felt strange, yet it was the only reality he knew at that moment. Ethan tried to move, but his body protested. Every muscle felt heavy, and bandages covered parts of his arms and chest. The confusion in his mind was even more unsettling than the physical discomfort. Where was he? How had he gotten there? And more importantly, who was he? A nurse entered the room, her steps soft against the linoleum floor. She had striking Latina features and a gentle smile that radiated calmness. Her badge identified her as Lucy Thompson. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. It's good to see you awake," she said, approaching to check his vitals. "How are you feeling?" Ethan. Thompson. The words echoed hollowly in his mind. They were supposedly his name, but they sparked no sense of familiarity. I don't know." His voice came out hoarse, as if unused for a long time. "I can't remember anything." Lucy paused what she was doing and looked at him carefully. Her dark eyes showed a mix of concern and compassion. "It's normal to feel confused after what happened," she explained, adjusting the IV. "The doctor will come see you soon. For now, you need to rest." "What happened to me?" he asked, trying to sit up. "Please don't strain yourself." Lucy gently stopped him. "Dr. Johnson will explain everything when he comes. For now, I'll bring you something light to eat." As she left the room, Ethan tried to organize his thoughts. It was like trying to put together a puzzle without a reference image. Disconnected. Fragments floated in his mind. The sound of hammers against wood, distant voices speaking in a language he couldn't identify, the smell of wet earth. Nothing made sense. Soon the room began to receive a series of visitors. Doctors and nurses came in and out, asking questions and conducting exams. Dr. Johnson, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses, explained that he had suffered a serious accident, but the details seemed vague and unclear. "Mr. Thompson, you are a very important man," the doctor remarked while examining his pupils. "There are several reporters asking for news about you. Your company has already sent representatives." Company. Ethan felt a new wave of confusion. What company? Why would he be important? Lucy returned later with a tray of food and some magazines. As she helped him settle in, she seemed different from the other professionals, less formal, more genuine in her concern. "I thought this might help," she said, placing the magazines on the bedside table. "These are some articles about your projects. Maybe they'll help refresh your memory." Ethan picked up one of the magazines, and his own face stared back at him from the cover. In the photo, he was wearing a sleek suit and smiling next to children in what looked like a newly built school. The headline read, "Ethan Thompson, the philanthropist transforming lives." "Is this me?" he murmured, touching the page with trembling fingers. "Yes," Lucy replied softly. "You've done a lot of good for many people." As he flipped through the pages, Ethan felt like a spectator watching someone else's life. The articles spoke of million-dollar donations, humanitarian projects, and the construction of schools and hospitals in underserved communities. The man described there seemed like a saint, but he couldn't connect with that image. "Lucy," he called out as she was about to leave the room, Did you know me before? About the accident?" She hesitated for a moment, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the tray she held. "No, Mr. Thompson. I only started taking care of you when you arrived here." There was something in her voice, an almost imperceptible note of tension, that Ethan couldn't decipher. Before he could ask more, she bid him farewell with a polite smile and left the room. Alone again, Ethan turned his attention to the window. The sun was setting over the city of New York, painting the sky in shades of orange. Somewhere out there was his life, his memories, his identity. Why then, Did it feel like he was observing everything through a foggy glass? He closed his eyes and tried to focus. Again, fragments of memory surfaced. The sound of heavy rain, raised voices, the creak of an old door, and then, clearer than the other recollections, the image of a small, rusted key. His heart raced without him knowing why. That key meant something important. But what? The heart monitor began to beep faster, and Ethan opened his eyes, forcing himself to breathe slowly. One thing was clear. There was much more to his story than the magazines told. And something told him that Lucy Thompson, the nurse with a compassionate gaze and a restrained smile, was also part of this mystery. The next morning, Ethan was awakened by raised voices in the hallway. He recognized one of them as Lucy's, usually so calm, now firm and defensive. "Mr. Thompson is not in a condition to receive so many visitors," she argued. "The medical instructions are clear." "You don't understand the urgency of the situation," replied a male voice, authoritative. "I'm Richard Stevenson, the financial director of Thompson Enterprises. There are decisions that need to be made immediately." Ethan watched through the crack of the slightly open door as Lucy held her ground, blocking the path of a tall man in an impeccable grey suit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stevenson, but as the patient's caregiver, I cannot allow it. Dr. Johnson left specific instructions regarding visits." Richard adjusted his tie, visibly annoyed. "Very well. I'll return at another time. But please deliver this to him." He handed over a brown envelope that Lucy reluctantly accepted. When she entered the room, Ethan pretended to be waking up. Lucy smiled, though her eyes seemed worried. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I'm sorry if the noise woke you," she said, placing the envelope on the table. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, I think," he replied, watching her curiously. "Do you always protect your patients with such vigor?" A slight blush colored Lucy's cheeks. "I just follow medical advice. You need peace to recover." Ethan picked up the envelope, feeling its considerable weight. "Do you know this Richard Stevenson?" "Only by sight. He's been coming to the hospital frequently since your accident, always insisting on seeing you." Lucy paused, as if carefully, choosing her next words. "You don't remember him?" Ethan opened the envelope, revealing a folder full of documents. Contracts, financial spreadsheets, and reports filled the pages, all bearing the logo of Thompson Enterprises. "No," he replied, flipping through the papers. "Just as I don't remember anything about these companies." As he examined the documents, a photo slipped out from between the pages. In it, Ethan was standing next to Richard and other executives, all smiling in front of a construction site. In the background, a sign announced, "New Horizons Project Building Dreams." The image stirred a strange feeling in his chest. For a moment, he smelled wet earth and heard the distant sound of construction machinery, the same fragmented memory that had been haunting him. "Lucy," he called, his voice low, "have you heard of the New Horizons project?" The nurse, who was organizing medications near the window, paused for a moment. When she turned, her face was composed, but Ethan noticed a subtle shift in her posture. "I read something about it in the magazines," she replied vaguely. "It was a project to build affordable housing, wasn't it?" Before Ethan could ask more questions, Dr. Johnson entered the room for his morning visit. As the doctor examined him, he noticed that Lucy had quietly slipped away. "Your test results are promising," the doctor informed him. "If you keep progressing like this, you could be discharged soon." "Doctor," Ethan began, "why won't anyone tell me exactly how I ended up here? What kind of accident did I have?" The doctor removed his glasses, methodically cleaning them with a handkerchief. "You were found unconscious in your home. The exact circumstances aren't clear yet, but there were signs of a fall. The important thing is that you're recovering well." The vague answer only deepened his suspicions. Why did everyone seem to avoid details about the accident? After the doctor left, Ethan turned his attention to the documents. Among contracts and financial reports, he found a series of photos of different social projects. In all of them, he appeared smiling, inaugurating schools, daycare centers, and hospitals. But one image in particular caught his attention: a small village surrounded by mountains, with simple, newly built houses. Something about that landscape stirred a deep unease within him. By late afternoon, Lucy returned for her final rounds of the day. Ethan noticed she avoided looking at the documents scattered across his bed. "Lucy," he called as she was about to leave, "do you believe people can change? That someone can spend their whole life building something and then discover they're not who they thought they were?" She stopped at the door, her hands gripping the clipboard she carried. "I believe what matters isn't who we were, but who we choose to be now," she replied softly before leaving the room. That night, as the city slept outside his window, Ethan was struck by a vivid dream. He stood in the rain, in front of an unfinished house. Someone was calling his name, but when he turned to look, he woke up startled. Beside his bed, among the personal belongings that had been brought from his home, a small wooden box caught his attention. He had never noticed it before. With trembling hands, he opened the lid, revealing a compartment lined with red velvet. It was empty, except for a circular mark on the surface, the exact size of a small key. The discovery of the empty box disturbed Ethan's sleep for the rest of the night. When the first rays of sunlight streamed through the hospital window, he was already awake, his mind buzzing with questions. The circular mark on the red velvet wouldn't leave his thoughts. Lucy entered the room earlier than usual that morning, carrying a tray with breakfast and some medications. Her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "You have a special visitor today," she announced, adjusting the height of the bed. "Your personal assistant, Helen Mitchell, has received permission from Dr. Johnson to see you." Ethan noticed a subtle tension in Lucy's voice when she mentioned the name. "Do you know her?" "She's been calling every day to check on your progress," Lucy replied, avoiding his gaze as she organized the medications. "She seems very dedicated." Before Ethan could ask more questions, an elegant woman in her 50s entered the room. Helen Mitchell had a striking presence, with perfectly styled grey hair and a tablet firmly held against her chest. "Ethan, what a relief to see you awake," Helen exclaimed, approaching the bed. Her sharp eyes quickly assessed the surroundings, lingering for a moment on Lucy, who was discreetly leaving the room. As soon as they were alone, Helen's expression changed. "We need to talk about urgent matters. Richard told me about your frustrated visit yesterday." "I'm sorry, but I don't remember you," Ethan replied sincerely. "Nor Richard, nor the companies, nor anything about my life." Helen sat in the chair beside the bed, her face softening. "I've worked with you for 15 years, Ethan. I know all about your projects, your decisions, your secrets. And now more than ever, I need you to trust me." She turned on the tablet and began showing photos and documents. "In the weeks leading up to the accident, you were acting differently. You seemed worried, distracted. You spent days reviewing old documents from the New Horizons project." "What's so special about that project?" Ethan asked, leaning in to get a better look at the images on the screen. "It was your first major social initiative," Helen explained, "building affordable housing in underserved villages, an ambitious project that inspired all the others that came after. But, Helen hesitated, glancing quickly at the door. "There were complications, issues that never came to light. You were determined to resolve something related to that when—" Her voice faltered. Ethan felt a sharp headache as a sudden memory hit him. He was in a dark office, yelling at someone. "We can't let this continue," his own voice echoed in his mind. "Helen," he called, pressing his temples. "Where is the key?" "What key?" she asked, seeming genuinely confused. "Small, old. It should have been with my belongings." "Ethan, you didn't have any key when you were found." "Just your phone, wallet, and—" She stopped abruptly as if she had said too much. At that moment, Lucy returned to the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but it's time for Mr. Thompson's medication." Helen stood up, quickly composing herself. "Of course. I'll come back another time. Ethan, think about what we discussed. And remember, not everyone is what they seem." After she left, a heavy silence hung in the room. Lucy administered the medication with professional efficiency, but Ethan noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Lucy," he called softly. "Where are you from?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't answer. "From a small village in the countryside," she finally said. "I came to New York looking for better opportunities." That village. Were there mountains around? Lucy dropped a bottle of medicine, which rolled under the bed. When she bent down to pick it up, Ethan noticed her eyes were watery. "Why are you asking that?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "Because I've been dreaming of a place like that. And something tells me it's not a coincidence that you're here." Lucy straightened up, clutching the bottle tightly. "Mr. Thompson, sometimes it's better to leave the past where it belongs. What if the past is the only key to understanding who I really am?" She walked to the window, gazing at the city outside. "Some truths have the power to change everything," she finally said. "Are you prepared for that?" Before Ethan could respond, raised voices echoed in the hallway. Richard Stevenson was arguing with the medical team again, this time more heatedly. "He needs to sign these documents today. We can't delay any longer." Lucy moved quickly toward the door, but paused for a moment. "Mr. Thompson, tonight is my last shift here. I'm being transferred to another wing." The news hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "Why?" "Orders from above," she replied, without turning around. "Apparently some think I'm too involved in your case." When she left, Ethan stared at the empty wooden box on his nightstand. In his mind, Helen's words echoed, "Not everyone is what they seem." But who was really playing a game of appearances? And why did he feel that Lucy was the only, truly sincere person amidst so much mystery? The twilight painted the sky over New York as Lucy began her final shift in the ward. Ethan watched the hospital activity through the window, trying to piece together the fragments of information he had gathered over the past few days. Helen's visit had left more questions than answers, and Lucy's impending transfer seemed far from coincidental. "I thought you'd be asleep by now," Lucy remarked as she entered the room for the nightly check. Her voice sounded different, as if she had made a difficult decision. "How can I sleep with so many unanswered questions?" Ethan replied, turning to face her. "Why are they transferring you, Lucy?" "The real reason." She closed the bedroom door gently and walked over to the window where he stood. For a long moment, she simply gazed at the city alongside him. "Meadowville," she finally said. "That's what the village I lived in was called. It had mountains all around, just like in your memories." Ethan felt his heart race. The New Horizons project? "Yes," Lucy confirmed, her voice choked. "That's where it all began. He arrived with grand promises and even bigger plans. For us, it was like a miracle. Families who never dreamed of owning a home would finally have a place to call their own." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "My parents received one of the houses. I was finishing my nursing studies at the time, doing volunteer work at the local health clinic. He even took a photo with me and others from the community during the inauguration." Ethan closed his eyes, trying to grasp the memory forming. "There was a celebration, local music, traditional food." "You remember?" Lucy asked, her eyes shining with surprise. "Fragments," he replied, frustrated. "Like loose pieces of a puzzle, but why is this being hidden from me? Why your transfer?" Lucy bit her lip, hesitating. Then she pulled a crumpled envelope from her uniform pocket. "Because I found this in the trash at the administrative office last night. Someone tried to get rid of it, but the cleaner is my friend and alerted me." Ethan opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a technical report dated 6 years ago, detailing structural issues in the New Horizons project buildings. Words like inadequate material and risk of collapse leapt off the pages. "Last month," Lucy continued, her voice barely containing her emotion, "there were landslides in Meadowville after heavy rain. 3 houses in the project were condemned. My parents, they had to leave in a hurry. Now they're staying with relatives." Ethan felt a wave of nausea. In his mind, flashes of memory began to connect. Heated arguments in meetings, documents being hidden, a voice warning about consequences. "I didn't know," he murmured, more to himself than to Lucy. "Or did I? Is that why I was investigating the project before the accident?" "What intrigues me," Lucy said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "is that I found something else." She pulled a small newspaper clipping from her pocket. "This news is from 3 days before your accident. You had called an extraordinary meeting of the Thompson Enterprises board. You were going to make an important announcement." Ethan examined the clipping. The article was short but significant. It spoke of rumors of a major restructuring within the company and possible changes in the management of social projects. Helen mentioned that I was acting differently, reviewing old documents, Ethan recalled. Do you think I discovered something? I think you were about to do something about it, Lucy replied, and someone didn't want that to happen. A noise in the hallway made them both jump. Lucy quickly tucked away the report and the clipping. I need to continue my rounds, she said, moving toward the door. But before... She hesitated, then pulled something from her other pocket. It was an old key, small and slightly rusted. Ethan's eyes widened. Where did you find that? It was with your belongings when you arrived at the hospital. I kept it when I saw Richard Stevenson going through your things on the first day. While you were still unconscious, something told me it was important. Ethan picked up the key, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. It fit perfectly into the mark on the red velvet box. Why are you telling me all this now? He asked, looking into her eyes. Because tomorrow I won't be here anymore, Lucy replied sadly, and because, unlike what Helen said, some people are exactly who they appear to be. I just want justice for my community, Mr. Thompson, and I think deep down you wanted that too before the accident. When she left the room, Ethan kept staring at the key in his hand. Lucy's words echoed in his mind, along with a new memory. That surfaced. He was in his office late at night, storing documents in a safe that this key probably opened. Outside, night fell over New York, and with it came the certainty that his life wasn't exactly what the magazines portrayed. There were secrets buried in the New Horizons project, secrets he might have tried to fight for. And now, with the unexpected help of a brave nurse from Meadowville, he had a chance to uncover the truth. The morning of his hospital discharge arrived with a mix of apprehension and determination. Ethan watched Helen organize his departure. With methodical efficiency, giving orders over the phone and coordinating a private security team she had insisted on hiring. It's just a precaution, she explained, noticing his questioning look. You're still recovering, and the press will certainly try to get close. The apartment he was returning to occupied the penthouse of a luxurious building in Uptown. As the elevator ascended, Ethan felt like an intruder in his own life. Lucy's last words before her transfer still echoed in his mind, along with the weight of the small key hidden in his coat pocket. I had your office prepared exactly as it was, Helen commented, guiding him through the apartment. I thought it might help with your memories. The space was elegant and minimalist, with a panoramic view of Central Park. Contemporary art pieces adorned the walls, but no personal photos were in sight. It was as if the place was more of a corporate extension than a home. I'll let you rest, Helen said, placing a folder on the office desk. Here are some documents that need your attention when you feel up to it. Richard has been calling me all morning about them. As soon as he was alone, Ethan began methodically exploring the apartment. Every drawer, every cabinet could hold clues about his life. In the closet, he found dozens of suits lined up by color, all with labels from famous tailors. In the spotless kitchen, the appliances seemed untouched. It was in the office that something finally caught his attention. Behind an abstract screen on the wall, he found a built-in safe. His heart raced as he inserted the small rusty key into the side lock, almost hidden beneath a decorative panel. The safe didn't open. Frustrated, Ethan examined the mechanism more closely. There was also a numeric keypad. The key alone wasn't enough. He needed a combination. He sat down at the office desk, trying to think. His eyes landed on the folder Helen had left behind. Inside, he found pending contracts and financial reports, all urgently requiring his signature. Among them, one document caught his attention. It was a request to transfer significant funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. His phone rang, startling him. It was a message from an unknown number. Santa Cruz Hospital Cafeteria, 3 p.m. I need to tell you something important. Lucy. Ethan glanced at the clock. 2:30 p.m. Without a second thought, he grabbed the car keys Helen had left on the sideboard. Santa Cruz Hospital was just a few blocks away. As he drove, he noticed a dark car following him at a distance. The security team Helen had hired, he presumed. The cafeteria was bustling when he arrived. He scanned the tables for Lucy, but didn't see her. Instead, an elderly woman wearing a cleaning staff uniform approached him. "Mr. Thompson," she called discreetly, "Lucy asked me to give you this." She left a small folded note on his table and quickly walked away. "Lucy couldn't come," the note read. "They're monitoring your phone, but I needed to warn you. Someone has been looking for old documents in the hospital's archives. Important. People asking questions about your hospitalization. Be careful who you trust." Meadowville wasn't the only project with issues. Ethan felt a chill. Looking out the cafeteria window, he saw the same dark car parked across the street. It wasn't security, it was surveillance. Back in the apartment, he faced the safe again. Lucy's note mentioned other projects with issues. He sat at the computer and began researching all the social initiatives of Thompson Enterprises over the past few years. A pattern began to emerge. In different locations, construction projects faced structural problems months or years after completion. The news stories were small, scattered, easy to ignore individually, but together they told a disturbing story. On his phone, he found a password-protected notes app. After several attempts, he accessed it using the inauguration date of the EWO New Horizons project, a number he had seen in the hospital documents. The last note was from 3 days before the accident. Material found HM involved from the start. Board meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. End it all. HM Helen Mitchell. At that moment, he heard the sound of the elevator arriving on his floor. Familiar voices echoed in the hallway. Helen and Richard. With quick movements, Ethan returned to the safe, the project's inauguration date. He typed the numbers on the keypad. The mechanism turned smoothly. Inside, he found a red folder with the Thompson Enterprises logo and the word confidential. But before he could open it, the office door began to open. In a swift motion, Ethan hid the red folder under his jacket just as Helen and Richard entered the office. His heart raced against the paper, as if the secrets contained within pulsed with a life of their own. "Ethan, what a surprise to find you here," Helen remarked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I thought you'd be resting." "The apartment is mine, isn't it?" he replied, keeping his tone casual, while discreetly closing the safe with his elbow. "I was just trying to get familiar with the place." Richard Stevenson crossed the room with firm steps, his presence dominating the space. "Great. Since you're here, we can take care of some urgent matters." He placed his briefcase on the table, near the documents Helen had left earlier. "Actually," Ethan said, standing up carefully to avoid revealing the red folder, "I'm quite tired. I think I overdid it a bit today." "It's just a few signatures," Helen insisted, her soft tone masking an unyielding firmness. "Issues that can't wait any longer. The transfer of funds mainly?" "To the Cayman Islands," Ethan finished, watching their reactions closely. Curious how this matter seemed so urgent. A tense silence filled the office. Helen and Richard exchanged a quick glance. "It's standard procedure," Richard explained, his voice controlled, "to protect the company's investments. You established this protocol yourself years ago." Ethan walked to the window, feeling the weight of the folder against his body. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the city, creating a play of light and darkness that seemed fitting for the moment. "You know what's interesting?" he began, turning to face them. "I spent the afternoon researching our social projects. I found a curious pattern of structural issues." Meadowville wasn't an isolated case. Helen's face paled slightly. "Ethan, you're not in a position to worry about that right now. The doctor recommended—" "The doctor?" he interrupted. "The same one who avoided giving me details about my so-called accident? Or maybe we should talk about the people who were rummaging through the hospital's archives." Richard took a step forward, his posture shifting subtly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Meadowville," Ethan replied, his voice gaining strength. "About houses built with substandard materials. About families who lost everything. About money diverted to offshore accounts." "You don't know what you're saying," Helen interjected, her mask of concern beginning to crack. "You're confused, mixing up facts." "No," Ethan cut her off, pulling the red folder from inside his jacket. "I think for the first time since I woke up in the hospital, I'm starting to see things clearly." Helen's face transformed as she saw the folder. "Where did you get that?" "From the same place you were hoping to find it, I imagine. That's why. You're here, isn't it? It wasn't the signatures you wanted." Richard moved quickly toward Ethan, but stopped when voices were heard in the hallway. It was the security team making their scheduled rounds. "You don't understand," Helen said, her voice now almost pleading. "Everything we did was to protect the company. The money diverted from the projects, and it was necessary. The market is ruthless, Ethan. You used to say that yourself." "And the accident?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Was that necessary too?" "It was an unfortunate accident," Richard replied quickly. "You were upset going through old documents, threatening to expose—" He stopped abruptly, realizing he had said too much. Ethan opened the red folder, revealing contracts, receipts, and a series of printed emails. "You were right about one thing. I really was about to expose everything. And now I'm going to finish what I started." "Be reasonable," Helen tried to argue. "Think of the scandal, the jobs that will be lost. Think of the families who have already lost everything." A firm voice sounded from the office door. Lucy was standing there, still in her hospital uniform, holding a phone that was recording the conversation. "How did you—" Helen began, but Lucy interrupted her. "The hospital cleaning lady wasn't the only ally I had," she said, stepping into the room. "And you weren't the only ones monitoring phones." Ethan felt a wave of relief at the sight of her. "Did you get my message?" "Yes," Lucy replied without taking her eyes off Helen and Richard. "Just like the district attorney received all the documentation you had been collecting before the accident. That board meeting you were planning, it's going to happen, but not the way they expected." The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of more people. Helen and Richard exchanged glances, realizing their time was up. "You know what's ironic?" Ethan said, looking at his former confidants. "You thought taking my memories would stop me from uncovering the truth. But it was losing everything that allowed me to see things as they really are." The days following the confrontation in the office were a whirlwind of events. The press, which had once celebrated Ethan Thompson as New York's great philanthropist, was now buzzing with headlines about the scandal at Thompson Enterprises. Helen and Richard were removed from their positions as investigations continued, and an external audit began scrutinizing every penny invested in the social projects. Ethan watched the city from the same window in his office, but now with different eyes. Lucy was by his side, organizing documents that would serve as evidence for the inquiry. "I still can't believe you managed to gather so much in such a short time," he remarked, amazed at the stack of papers on the table. "I wasn't alone," Lucy replied, a small smile on her lips. "After I started asking questions in Meadowville, other people began to talk. Hospital staff, construction workers, even some lower-level executives who suspected irregularities." Ethan picked up an old photo they had found among the documents. In it, he was standing next to Lucy during the inauguration of the houses in Meadowville 6 years ago. Both were smiling at the camera, full of hope for the future. "It's strange," he said, contemplative. "I look at this photo and see two different people. I really believed I was doing good, didn't I?" "You did," Lucy confirmed, sitting in the nearby chair. "And that's why Helen and Richard worked so hard to keep you away from the operational details. They knew that if you discovered the truth, you wouldn't accept it." A notification sound interrupted the conversation. It was a message on Lucy's phone. 3 more families from Meadowville had agreed to join the lawsuit. "How are your parents?" Ethan asked, noticing how tense she became whenever the subject came up. "Adjusting," she replied, putting her phone away. "My uncle's apartment is small, but at least they're safe. I still can't convince them to file an individual lawsuit." "Pride?" "Gratitude," Lucy corrected, her eyes meeting his. "Even after everything that happened, they still remember. The man who showed up in the village promising a better life, and in a way he delivered. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that project." Ethan stood up, walking over to a large meeting table where blueprints and plans were scattered. They were the new designs for rebuilding the affected homes, developed by a team of independent engineers. "You know what's ironic?" he remarked, studying the drawings. "Even with all the embezzlement, we still have enough funds in the offshore accounts to rebuild every house. with money left over to compensate the families. How did you find the account passwords? I didn't, he smiled, but Helen was too methodical. She kept everything in encrypted spreadsheets on her computer. Once the police seized the equipment, it was only a matter of time. Lucy stepped closer, examining the plans. The new homes would be more resilient, adapted to the terrain, with proper drainage systems to prevent future issues with rain. The public prosecutor's office called early this morning, she mentioned. They want to schedule your deposition for next week. Do you feel prepared? To tell a story I'm still trying to understand? He laughed dryly. It'll be interesting, but yes, I'm ready. I can't let the fear of sounding confused stop justice from being served. The room phone began to ring. It was the new legal team wanting to confirm details for the emergency board meeting scheduled for the next day. Ethan answered, jotting down notes as he listened to the instructions. Lucy took the moment to step closer to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the New York sky with shades of orange and pink. She remembered other sunsets in Meadowville, when she would watch the same sky and dream of a different life in the big city. They want to move the meeting up to 9, Ethan informed her after hanging up. Apparently some board members are nervous about the possibility of being implicated in the scheme. And are they? Some knew, others preferred not to know. The important thing is that we now have enough support to approve the restructuring plan. Lucy nodded, still gazing at the city. And then? What happens to Thompson Enterprises? Ethan joined her at the window, their shoulders almost touching. We'll start over, do it right this time, no middlemen, no shortcuts, no lies, and I want you to be part of it. She turned, surprised. What do you mean? I need someone who understands the reality of the communities, who isn't afraid to point out mistakes, who puts people above profits, he explained. Someone I can trust. Are you offering me a job? Lucy asked, a playful smile on her lips. I'm offering a partnership, Ethan corrected. Meadowville will just be the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead. Before Lucy could respond, they heard voices in the hallway. The engineering team had arrived for the last meeting of the day. It was time to turn blueprints and plans into reality. So, Ethan asked as they walked toward the meeting room, do you accept the challenge? Lucy paused for a moment, thoughtful. On one condition, she finally replied. We start with Meadowville. My family and those people have waited long enough. Ethan extended his hand, a formal gesture carrying the weight of a promise. Deal. When their hands met, both felt that handshake symbolized more than a professional agreement. It was the start of something new, built on the ruins of the past but with much stronger foundations. The arrival of the Thompson Enterprises delegation to Meadowville caused quite a stir in the small village. Residents crowded at windows and doors, watching the cars making their way up the dirt road. Ethan, in the passenger seat, felt the weight of their gazes. Lucy drove in silence, her fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. Are you sure you want to start here? She asked, parking near the local church. The council meeting just ended. We could have waited a few more days. You were the one who said it, Ethan replied, adjusting his tie. These people have waited long enough. The community center had been chosen for the meeting with the residents. It was a simple hall, with plastic chairs arranged in a circle and faded posters on the walls. The smell of fresh coffee came from the kitchen, where a few women were moving about, preparing what seemed to be an impromptu snack for the visitors. Lucy recognized her parents among those already seated in the hall. Her mother, Mrs. Clara, maintained a reserved expression, while her father, Mr. Joseph, couldn't hide the suspicion in his eyes. Good afternoon, everyone, Ethan began, his voice echoing in the now silent room. I know many of you recognize me, though I don't have all the memories of this place. A murmur spread through the room. The story of the accident and Ethan's memory loss had reached the village, mixed with rumors about the scandal at the companies. But I'm here today, he continued, because some truths don't need memory to be recognized. What was done to Meadowville, to your homes, to your families, was wrong. And now you want to fix everything with more promises? Mr. Joseph's voice rang out strongly in the hall. How can we trust you? Lucy stepped forward, placing blueprints and documents on a central table. That's why we've brought not just promises, but legal guarantees. Every family will have access to the plans, the costs, the materials that will be used, and more. Importantly, you'll be part of the entire rebuilding process. My daughter, Mrs. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice soft but firm. Did you leave your job at the hospital for this? I didn't leave, Mom, Lucy replied, exchanging a quick glance with Ethan. I just realized I can help more people. This way. An elderly man stood up at the back of the hall. It was Mr. Manuel, the former community leader. What about the families who've already spent their savings trying to repair their homes? Who will compensate them? Each case will be analyzed individually, Ethan explained, opening his folder. We have a specific fund for compensations, but more than that, we want to create a local development program, generate jobs through the reconstruction itself, establish vocational training courses. Nice words, a woman's voice interrupted. It was Helen Mitchell, a teacher at the local school, like the ones we heard last time. But now we have children studying in makeshift classrooms because the new building cracked. The tension in the room grew thicker. Lucy noticed Ethan was sweating slightly, still not fully recovered from his time in the hospital, but his eyes remained steady, facing each question head-on. Mrs. Helen, he replied, the school will be our immediate priority. We've brought in a team of engineers who will start the structural assessment today, and this time the school community will be part of every decision. What about you two? Mr. Joseph spoke up again, looking from Ethan to Lucy. This partnership, is there something you're not telling us? Lucy felt her face flush. Dad, this has nothing to do with... It does, Ethan gently interrupted her. Your daughter was the only person brave enough to expose the truth. Without her, I would still be living a lie, and you would still be waiting for justice. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of footsteps. Mrs. Clara had stood up and walked to the central table. With deliberate gestures, she picked up one of the blueprints and began examining it. This drainage system, she pointed to the drawing, will it solve the flooding problem? Yes, ma'am, replied the lead engineer, who had been quietly observing until then. The system was designed considering the region's rainfall history. As if that gesture had broken an invisible barrier, other residents began to approach, asking questions and raising specific concerns. Fear and distrust were still present, but now mixed with something new. Hope. Ethan watched the commotion when he felt a hand touch his arm. It was Mr. Joseph. I don't fully trust you yet, the man said quietly, but I trust my daughter's judgment. She always sees the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. Lucy, who was organizing documents nearby, pretended not to hear the conversation, but a small smile played on her lips as she watched her father join the group discussing the projects. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated the mountains surrounding Meadowville. The same mountains that appeared in Ethan's fragmented dreams now bore witness to the beginning of a new story. A story that, this time, would be built not on empty promises, but on foundations of truth and redemption. 3 months had passed since the first meeting in Meadowville. Autumn was coming to an end, bringing with it the first rains that had so worried the community. However, this time, the weather didn't inspire the same fear as before. The drainage works, the first phase of the reconstruction project, were almost complete. Ethan walked through the construction site alongside the lead engineer, observing the teams at work. Many of the workers were local residents, trained through the vocational course they had established in partnership with the Vocational Training Center. The preliminary tests of the drainage system were positive, the engineer explained, consulting his clipboard, and the school is practically ready for reopening. What about the houses in the most critical area? On schedule, the families should be able to return in 2 weeks. Ethan smiled, satisfied. The sound of hammering and electric saws was like music to his ears, the sound of real progress, not just empty promises. His phone vibrated. A message from Lucy. Emergency meeting in New York, we need to return now. Something about the tone of the message worried him. Lucy wasn't one to raise unnecessary alarms. On the way back, she drove in silence, her face tense. Only when they entered the city did she begin to explain. Edward Johnson, one of the advisors who supported our restructuring, has been hit. Someone hacked into his company's systems and leaked confidential information. He's being blackmailed to withdraw his support for the project." "Helen and Richard?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Most likely, but we have no way to prove it. They may be in custody awaiting trial, but they still have powerful connections." They arrived at the office to find Edward Johnson already waiting for them, accompanied by his lawyer. The man seemed to have aged years in just a few days. "Ethan, I'm sorry," he began, his voice weary. "I can't take the risk. I have a company to protect, employees who depend on me." "What exactly are they demanding?" Lucy asked, maintaining a professional tone. The lawyer slid a document across the table. "They want him to vote against the continuation of the reconstruction projects at next week's assembly. And it's not just him. Other council members have also been approached." Ethan sank heavily into his chair. All the progress they had made was now threatened. Without the council's support, the resources would be blocked. "There must be something we can do," Lucy insisted, flipping through the document. "Some legal loophole." "We've already consulted all the experts," the lawyer replied. "Without concrete evidence of Helen and Richard's involvement, there's nothing we can do." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a familiar headache coming on. And then, like a flash, a memory surfaced. He was in his old office late at night, installing something on his computer. "Backup system," he murmured, suddenly opening his eyes. "Lucy, remember that safe we found? There was more than just documents in there." He stood up, energized by the recollection. "I maintained a parallel backup system. Independent of the company's network, it was my insurance against exactly this kind of situation." "Where is this backup?" Edward asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "Not where, but how," Ethan smiled. "The rusty key. It wasn't just for the safe. It's a cryptographic key." Lucy understood immediately. "The encrypted files we found on your personal computer, we thought they were corrupted." The next few hours were filled with intense work. As IT specialists worked to decipher the files, Ethan and Lucy organized the strategy for the assembly. "Even if we get the evidence," Lucy pondered, serving coffee for both late at night, "we'll still have to convince the other board members." "It's not just that," Ethan replied, massaging his temples. "We need to make sure the construction doesn't stop. Those people in Meadowville, we can't let them down again." Lucy stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder. "We won't let them down. You're not the same man who built those houses the first time, and I'm not the same nurse trying to help your community alone." Ethan covered her hand with his, a gesture that was becoming increasingly natural between them. "You know what's funny? The more I recover my memories, the more I realize I needed to lose them to see what really matters." The computer emitted a signal, indicating that the decryption was complete. On the screen, dozens of files began to appear: emails, bank transfers, recorded conversations. Helen and Richard's entire scheme documented in detail. "This changes everything," Edward Johnson's lawyer said, examining the files. "With this evidence, we can not only protect the board members, but also speed up the criminal proceedings against those responsible." Edward Johnson seemed to have regained years of life in minutes. "I'll call the other board members, right? Now we need a meeting before the assembly." When they were finally alone in the office, Ethan and Lucy allowed themselves a moment of relief. Through the window, they could see the lights of New York shining in the night, like earthly stars, promising a new dawn. "Meadowville is expecting more rain this week," Lucy commented, checking the weather forecast on her phone. "This time," Ethan replied, "they're prepared, we all are." The phone rang. It was Mr. Joseph, wanting to know when they'd return to the village. Lucy put it on speaker, and her father's voice filled the room. "The construction can't stop now, my daughter. There are so many people here finally believing that change is possible." Ethan and Lucy exchanged a knowing look. It was possible, and they would prove it, one brick at a time. The auditorium at Thompson Enterprises headquarters was packed on the morning of the extraordinary assembly. In addition to the board members, dozens of shareholders and press representatives awaited the start of the meeting. In the center of the front row, a surprise: Mrs. Clara and Mr. Joseph representing the Meadowville community. Ethan adjusted his tie for the third time when Lucy entered the preparation room. The lawyers just confirmed Helen and Richard have been granted habeas corpus. They're on their way. He nodded, already expecting this. Good. I want them to see everything with their own eyes. Ethan, Lucy hesitated, stepping closer. There's something I need to tell you before we start. About the day of your accident. The door opened again, interrupting her. It was Edward Johnson. It's time. The press is buzzing with the news of Helen and Richard's release. In the hallway on the way to the auditorium, Ethan briefly held Lucy's arm. You'll tell me later, okay? She agreed, but her eyes carried a shadow of concern he couldn't decipher. The chatter in the auditorium ceased as Ethan stepped onto the stage. From the audience, familiar and unfamiliar faces stared at him with anticipation. His adoptive parents, major shareholders of the company, sat discreetly in the back. Good morning, everyone, he began. Before we formally start this meeting, I'd like to make a special presentation. The screen behind him lit up, showing images of Meadowville. First, the dilapidated houses, the cracks, the structural issues. Then, recent photos of the restoration work, the vocational training courses, the renovated school. This is the true legacy we want to build, he continued. Not just buildings and structures, but trust and dignity. A movement at the entrance of the auditorium caught everyone's attention. Helen and Richard had just arrived, accompanied by their lawyers. Their gazes met Ethan's, a mix of defiance and apprehension. What a pleasant surprise, Ethan remarked, without missing a beat. Since you're here, you can help us clarify a few points. Lucy was organizing documents at a side table when she noticed something strange. Helen, upon entering, had made a discreet gesture to someone in the audience. Following the direction, she identified a man who shouldn't have been there, the company's former IT technician. Ethan, she called softly, moving toward him, but he had already started presenting the evidence. These documents, he pointed, to the screen where emails and spreadsheets were displayed, show a systematic scheme of resource diversion. Every penny that should have been invested in quality materials. Suddenly the lights in the auditorium flickered. The screen behind Ethan went dark. It seems we're having technical issues, Helen commented, a subtle smile on her lips. But Ethan also smiled. Actually, no. Lucy. She pressed a button on her tablet, and all the personal screens of the council members lit up simultaneously, each showing a different part of the evidence. Backup of the backup, Ethan explained. I've learned not to rely on a single system. Helen's face lost its color. Richard stood up abruptly, but his lawyers held him back. But do you know what's most interesting? Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength. Among all these documents, we found something even more significant. Lucy, please. She hesitated for a moment, then projected the final file. It was a security video from Ethan's office, from the night of his accident. In it, Helen and Richard confronted Ethan, who was holding a red folder. You can't do this, Helen's voice echoed in the video. Think of the scandal. I already have, the Ethan in the video replied, about everything, about the families, the lives at risk. Tomorrow, I'll expose everything at the board meeting. The video showed Ethan storing the folder in the safe, and then darkness. The security system had been turned off during the crucial minutes of the accident. A murmur spread through the auditorium. Mrs. Clara held Mr. Joseph's hand, silent, tears streaming down her face. We don't just have evidence of the diversions, Ethan announced, his voice now filled with restrained emotion. We have evidence of attempted cover-ups, threats of— Enough, Helen shouted, standing up. You don't understand. Everything we did was to protect the company, to keep it competitive. Who cares about a few poorly built houses when— I care. Lucy's voice cut through the air like a whip. Those few houses are homes, their dreams, their lives. A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. Ethan watched Helen, the woman who had been his mentor and confidant for years, now exposed in her true nature. Gentlemen, you have in your hands, he addressed the board members, all the necessary documents to make a decision, not just about the future of Thompson Enterprises, but about the kind of legacy we want to leave behind. Lucy approached the stage, carrying the old, red briefcase, the same one that had disappeared the night of the accident and now finally returned to tell its story. The vote is open, Ethan concluded, and this time there's no way to hide the truth. The board's vote was unanimous. After the revelations at the assembly, there was no longer any way to sustain the old system. Helen and Richard were escorted out of the building by police officers, this time with no possibility of another habeas corpus. The evidence was irrefutable. In Ethan's office, hours later, the legal team was still working on the final details of the documents. Lucy was on the balcony, watching the New York sunset, when he joined her. "You still haven't told me what you wanted to say before the assembly," Ethan remarked, leaning on the railing beside her. Lucy took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "It's about the night of your accident. I was at the hospital that night, not as a nurse, but as a visitor." Ethan turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I'd come to New York to try to talk to you. The problems in Meadowville were getting worse, and no one was listening to us. I managed to find out where your office was, and waited for hours in the building's reception. I saw when Helen and Richard left, looking nervous, against exactly this kind of situation." "Where is this backup?" Edward asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "Not where, but how," Ethan smiled. "The rusty key. It wasn't just for the safe. It's a cryptographic key." Lucy understood immediately. "The encrypted files we found on your personal computer, we thought they were corrupted." The next few hours were filled with intense work. As IT specialists worked to decipher the files, Ethan and Lucy organized the strategy for the assembly. "Even if we get the evidence," Lucy pondered. Then I saw when the paramedics brought him in." She paused, her eyes welling up. "I stayed at the hospital that whole night, pretending to be just another person in the waiting room. When I found out he had survived but had lost his memory, I decided I needed to do something. I managed to get transferred to his ward, and the rest you already know." Ethan processed the information slowly. "So it wasn't a coincidence?" "No," she admitted, "but every moment after that, every conversation, every discovery, it was all real. I just didn't know how to tell you before." He stepped closer, gently touching her face. "You risked everything." "It was worth it," she smiled through tears. "Seeing today at the assembly, Mrs. Clara and my father, seeing hope returning." They were interrupted by Edward Johnson, who brought the final reports for signing. "Sorry to interrupt," he smiled discreetly, "but I thought you'd like to know. The first families can return to their homes in Meadowville next week. The engineering team has given the final approval." Ethan signed the documents without taking his eyes off Lucy. There was something different in the air between them, as if the last barrier had finally fallen. "I need to go to Meadowville early tomorrow," Lucy said, organizing her things. "We promised the community they'd be the first to know about every decision." "I'll go with you," Ethan replied promptly. "But first," he hesitated, then continued, "how about we have dinner? There's an Italian restaurant nearby. We can talk about everything. No companies, no scandals, no secrets." Lucy smiled, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. No secrets would be great. The restaurant was small and cozy, with little tables on the sidewalk sheltered by a striped awning. Sitting there under the soft lights of the New York night, Ethan and Lucy seemed finally free from the roles they had needed to play. "You know what's funny?" Ethan commented, pouring wine for both of them. "Even when I had no memory at all, something about you felt familiar from the very first day at the hospital." "Maybe some things are stronger than memories," she replied, her eyes meeting his across the table. The night deepened, and with it came the feeling that one cycle was closing, so another could begin. The city lights shone like silent witnesses to a story that had started with pain and mistakes, but now pointed toward a different future. "Do me a favor?" Lucy asked as they walked back to the building where she had parked. "When we get to Meadowville tomorrow, don't go straight to the construction site. I want to show you a place first." "What place?" "The health clinic where I worked as a volunteer. That's where I first saw you 6 years ago. You were truly happy that day, inaugurating the project. And now," she smiled, "now we can do everything the right way." Ethan stopped walking, gently holding her hand. Lucy, thank you. Not just for helping me recover my memories, but for helping me build new ones, better ones. The night wind carried the scent of the trees from the nearby park, and on the illuminated sidewalk, two hearts that had found each other amidst the rubble discovered that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. The sun had barely risen when Ethan and Lucy arrived in Meadowville. The dew still covered the grass on the mountain slopes, reflecting the golden morning light. Following her request, they stopped first at the old health clinic. "It hasn't changed much," Lucy commented, opening the rusty door. The interior was simple but clean and organized. On the walls, alongside informational posters, were old photographs of the community. There, she pointed to a particular photo. In it, a younger Ethan was cutting the inauguration ribbon, while a recently graduated Lucy smiled in the background, along with other residents. "I was a different man back then," Ethan reflected, gently touching the photograph, "full of ideals before I let others corrupt the project." "And now you're a different man again," she replied, intertwining her fingers with his, stronger, more aware. They left the clinic to find the community already in motion. The construction site buzzed with activity. Local residents, now properly trained and equipped, worked side by side with the technical team. Mrs. Clara waited for them at the entrance of the renovated school, where a small ceremony was being organized. Not a grandiose inauguration like in the old days, but a community celebration. "Just look," she smiled, hugging her daughter and surprising Ethan with another warm embrace. "Who would have thought that stubborn nurse and the amnesiac businessman would bring us here?" The morning passed with technical inspections and conversations with the residents. The first families would begin returning to their renovated homes the next day. These weren't just safer buildings, they were symbols of a greater transformation. Close to lunchtime, Mr. Joseph appeared carrying plants and documents. As the community's chosen representative, he now actively participated in all project decisions. "The folks from the vocational training course are asking about expanding the program," he commented, consulting his notes. "There's interest from people in other communities." "We can start planning that," Ethan replied, observing the movement around him. "Actually, I was thinking of something bigger." He led the small group to an empty lot near the community center. The spot had a privileged view of the valley. "What do you think about building a vocational training center here?" he proposed. "Not just for construction, but for other fields too. We could bring in technical courses, partnerships with universities." Lucy squeezed his hand immediately, understanding the vision. "A regional development hub." "Exactly," he smiled. "Meadowville could become a model for rebuilding not just houses, but entire communities." Mr. Joseph scratched his chin, thoughtful. "It'll need someone who knows the area, who has the people's trust, and someone who understands social projects and business management," Lucy added, exchanging a knowing look with Ethan. The group continued discussing ideas during the community lunch, organized in the church hall. The aroma of homemade food mingled with laughter and lively conversations. At a nearby table, young people from the vocational training course proudly showed off their newly received certificates. By late afternoon, Ethan and Lucy climbed to the highest point in Meadowville. From there, they could see the entire community, the houses with their new solid structures, the school with its renovated courtyard, the constant movement of people building not just walls, but a future. "You know what's most amazing?" Lucy remarked, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. "It all started with a loss. You lost your memories. I almost lost hope of helping my community. And we found something greater," Ethan added, turning to her. "We found a purpose. We found each other." The gentle evening breeze carried the scent of earth and vegetation, the same aroma that had haunted Ethan's fragmented memories in the hospital. But now it was no longer a mystery. It was the fragrance of home. "How about we stay a little longer?" he suggested. "There's a meeting with the Residents Association early tomorrow, and that land for the vocational training center needs to be assessed further." Lucy smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "There's always something more to build, isn't there?" "Yes," he replied, holding her close. "And this time, we'll build it together." The sun finally set behind the mountains, But Meadowville remained, alive and vibrant. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the renovated houses as dinner was prepared. In the community center, lights turned on for an evening class at the vocational training center. Children still played on the new school playground, their laughter echoing through the valley. It was more than a rebuilt community. It was a promise, fulfilled, a dream realized the right way. And for Ethan and Lucy, it was just the beginning of a story that, like the surrounding mountains, was destined to stand firm and true, enduring time and storms, a testament that it's always possible to start over, as long as you have the courage to face the truth and enough love to turn it into something better. Not a grandiose inauguration like in the old days, but a community celebration. "Just look," she smiled, hugging her daughter and surprising Ethan with another warm embrace. Who would have thought that stubborn nurse and the amnesiac businessman would bring us here? The morning passed with technical inspections and conversations with the residents. The first families would begin returning to their renovated homes the next day. These weren't just safer buildings, they were symbols of a greater transformation. Close to lunchtime, Mr. Joseph appeared carrying plants and documents. As the community's chosen representative, he now actively participated in all project decisions. "The folks from the vocational training course are asking about expanding the program," he commented, consulting his notes. "There's interest from people in other communities." "We can start planning that," Ethan replied, observing the movement around him. "Actually, I was thinking of something bigger." He led the small group to an empty lot near the community center. The spot had a privileged view of the valley. "What do you think about building a vocational training center here?" he proposed. "Not just for construction, but for other fields too. We could bring in technical courses, partnerships with universities." Lucy squeezed his hand immediately, understanding the vision. "A regional development hub." "Exactly," he smiled. "Meadowville could become a model for rebuilding not just houses, but entire communities." Mr. Joseph scratched his chin, thoughtful. "It'll need someone who knows the area, who has the people's trust, and someone who understands social projects and business management," Lucy added, exchanging a knowing look with Ethan. The group continued discussing ideas during the community lunch, organized in the church hall. The aroma of homemade food mingled with laughter and lively conversations. At a nearby table, young people from the vocational training course proudly showed off their newly received certificates. By late afternoon, Ethan and Lucy climbed to the highest point in Meadowville. From there, they could see the entire community, the houses with their new solid structures, the school with its renovated courtyard, the constant movement of people building not just walls, but a future. "You know what's most amazing?" Lucy remarked, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. "It all started with a loss. You lost your memories. I almost lost hope of helping my community. And we found something greater," Ethan added, turning to her. "We found a purpose. We found each other." The gentle evening breeze carried the scent of earth and vegetation, the same aroma that had haunted Ethan's fragmented memories in the hospital. But now it was no longer a mystery. It was the fragrance of home. "How about we stay a little longer?" he suggested. "There's a meeting with the Residents Association early tomorrow, and that land for the vocational training center needs to be assessed further." Lucy smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "There's always something more to build, isn't there?" "Yes," he replied, holding her close. "And this time, we'll build it together." The sun finally set behind the mountains, but Meadowville remained, alive and vibrant. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the renovated houses as dinner was prepared. In the community center, lights turned on for an evening class at the vocational training center. Children still played on the new school playground, their laughter echoing through the valley. It was more than a rebuilt community. It was a promise, fulfilled, a dream realized the right way. And for Ethan and Lucy, it was just the beginning of a story that, like the surrounding mountains, was destined to stand firm and true, enduring time and storms, a testament that it's always possible to start over, as long as you have the courage to face the truth and enough love to turn it into something better.